Now we all know the first couple rounds of your draft are the best, the most fun, what we look forward to. But if there's one thing I've learned throughout my years of fantasy, it's that you can't win your leagues based off your first few rounds. But you can definitely lose it. Today we're going to be going through the first 3 rounds of your draft from 1 through 12 and the potential start you can have to dominate your draft and your league. But before we get into that, if you enjoy the channel at all, please support us down below, whether if you subscribe or just like the video. It all goes a very long way. We're on the road to 500 subscribers on the channel, and we can't get there without y'all. We're going to start here with the number 1 pick, as I've started to see some people overthink this spot, right? As you should do with the number 1 pick, but people are taking CMC or Jamar Chase or Cooper Kupp. The number 1 this entire offseason has been a consensus, Justin Jefferson, and that is for good reason. To me, he's going to be the number 1 pick here, and if you're in the first spot, I believe you guys will see how the draft board plays out, but on the 2-3 turn, right, you get Jefferson. On the way back, you can get Derrick Henry and Mark Andrews with how the boards are falling right now based off of consensus ADP, and with this build, I mean, you get stability and upside, right? You know what these three guys are going to give you, but they can also explode and be the number 1 player at their positions. So you could potentially have 3 number 1 players at their respective positions at the number 1 pick. That is absolutely insane. And this build also lets you go on later in the draft and draft a Lamar Jackson in the 4th round, right? If he slips that far. Or you could draft a Kirk Cousins to stack with a Justin Jefferson or Lamar with a Mark Andrews. This build is amazing. You can maybe get a top 5 running back as well with Derrick Henry. You can't really go wrong with the number 1 pick. I love drafting in the early spots of the draft. The number 2 pick is a lot of the same, right? To me, the next best receiver available is Cooper Kupp, a guy that the last 2 years that he's played has basically been on route to have 2 Triple Crown seasons. I mean, last year he was more dominant than his Triple Crown season before he was injured, right? So Cooper Kupp to me is the number 2 receiver, and he's the guy who you could argue to take at the number 1 spot, right? But for me, he will be my number 2 pick this season. And at the number 2 pick, you can follow up this with Cooper Kupp with a Josh Allen at the end of the 2nd round. And then, based off of how the draft board falls, you could get a Ramondre Stevenson in the 3rd round, right? So you can get potentially the best player in fantasy football in Cooper Kupp. You can get the best quarterback in Josh Allen. And then you could also, in the 3rd round, get a possible top 5 running back and league winner type of back in Ramondre Stevenson. All the advanced numbers in fantasy point to Ramondre being that next breakout running back. And you can get him in the 3rd round with Cooper Kupp, with Josh Allen. I mean, this is a perfect start to a fantasy team, and it's going to be hard to mess this team up after this first 3 rounds. The 3rd pick is going to look like Jamar Chase. To me, he's the number 3rd pick, as you can argue Tyreek Hill, you can argue CMC. To me, I think I'd be more comfortable taking Jamar Chase here with the 3rd pick, with the running back value we can get in the 2nd and 3rd round. As you see, with a Jamar Chase start, you could follow this up with a Nick Chubb. A lot of people aren't high on Nick Chubb this year because of his passing work, because the Browns' offense is going to be a lot more pass-focused. I understand, right? But you could still get the caliber of back of Nick Chubb at the end of the 2nd round, right, with a Jamar Chase as your start. Then you compare that with a lot of people's fantasy darlings, right, in Breece Hall in the 3rd round. So you can have 2 backs, right, a Thunder and Lightning. One in Nick Chubb that's more of a traditional, smash mouth back, and then you can get Breece Hall, which is going to catch a lot of passes, be a PPR monster for you. So with this build, right, you get a possible wide receiver 1 in Jamar Chase. You get tons of upside, right, with Nick Chubb, Breece Hall. This team can potentially have 2 possible top 5 running backs when the season is closed off. So you're going to have basically, I think you get a little bit of everything. I think it is a lot of stability and upside, and that's a lot of things that I look forward in my fantasy builds, right? I look for a lot of stability and upside. The number 4 pick is going to be Tyreek Hill. Again, it's either him or CMC. I want to be mad if the 3 through 5 if you switch who that pick is. But to me, I'm going to go with Tyreek Hill. And you can follow that up with a Jalen Hurts. It's a little bit of a reach, right? But in that 2nd round, you strategically take Jalen Hurts because you could pair him with a Devontae Smith in the 3rd round, right? So you can get a Philly stack, right? One of the most explosive, high-powered offenses in the league with a top 12 wide receiver to me in Devontae Smith. So you can have a wide receiver 1 with maybe the quarterback 1 And then Tyreek Hill on top of that. I mean, that is insane. You can have definitely Tyreek Hill and a Philly stack. Or if you don't want to go Jalen Hurts, you could go a different route and get a Tua in like rounds 8 or 9 and still have a Miami stack. I mean, I think just going Tyreek Hill gives you a lot of versatility. Go, in these drafts, maybe you go Tyreek Hill, Nick Chubb, Devontae Smith, right? And then go get Tua later on. It's a lot of versatility, but to me, you get Tyreek Hill, one of the best wide receivers in the game, maybe the best wide receiver this season, and then you can get a Jalen Hurts and Devontae Smith, right? A Philly stack. I think this is a great start, a lot of high-powered starts, right? And you could still, in the 4th round, get a different running back, right? And yes, this team does lack at the running back position, but Jalen Hurts brings you rushing upside, right? And I also think in round 4 or 5, if you want to go out there and if a Jahmyr Gibbs slips to you, or an Alvin Kamara, or Joe Mixon, go out there and grab one of those guys, or an Aaron Jones, right? Grab one of those guys, and you're going to be just A-okay there at the running back position. But moving over to the pick 5, and I think you start with CMC. I think this is where CMC finally falls, being the best running back on the board. You could follow that up with a Garrett Wilson, right? A guy that a lot of people love this season. I've seen people have him as high as top 5 as far as their fantasy rankings for receivers. To me, I'm not as high, but he's still a wide receiver 1 for me. I think he's my number 11 wide receiver. Regardless, you could follow that up with a T. Higgins, right? So with this build, you can get possibly the running back 1 with CMC, the positional advantage over everybody else in your league. You can get a top 5 receiver potentially in Garrett Wilson, a guy who all the signs point to him breaking out and having a Justin Jefferson type of year, especially with Aaron Rodgers now in town. With this build also, you see with T. Higgins, you could pair him with Joe Burrow in the 4th round. Or with Garrett Wilson, you could pair him with Aaron Rodgers later on in your drafts. So you get possibly the running back 1, two potential top 10 receivers. I mean, I think this build gives you a lot of upside, right? A lot of guaranteed value or volume, right? With CMC and Garrett Wilson, even T. Higgins, right? Even though his production has dropped the last 2 years, he's still a very good wide receiver. And I believe he's number 13 for me or so. Regardless, this is a very balanced build. Again, a lot of stability and upside. If CMC goes down, you still have 2 top 10 receivers to carry the load. So I think this is a very balanced build, and it still has the upside to win your year league. The number 6 pick, it might be the craziest build you'll see, right? But it makes a lot of sense. I think this is a stack that we'll see a lot this season. But Travis Kelce at the number 6 pick, you follow that up with a Pat Mahomes selection to get the KC stack, and then you get Chris Olave in the 3rd round, right? So my thinking here was you could potentially get the tight end 1, the quarterback 1, the Kansas City stack, right, which is those 2 players, and then you could get a Chris Olave, a second-year receiver that could potentially be a wide receiver 1 in the 3rd round, a guy who could take your team over the top and really make it an unfair team to go against, especially in the PPR formats. It all just comes down to your belief of this Saints offense, right? Do you believe in Derek Carr? Do you believe that he could make Chris Olave a very fantasy-relevant wide receiver? We've seen him do it last year with Andy Dalton, right? So you can only imagine he could do it to a higher level with a guy like Derek Carr now in town, right? So this build, right, again, you don't have a lot of running backs, but you could still grab a Joe Mixon and Aaron Jones, right? Or wait a little bit, right, and get other running backs later on in your draft. But to me, this build gives you a lot of PPR upside and a lot of guaranteed value, right? And that's kind of what we want to look for, especially in the middle of your drafts. And the number 7th pick, we have Austin Eckler, potentially the running back 1 on the season. You could follow that up with a Jalen Waddle in the 2nd round, and then Najee Harris in the 3rd round. Jalen Waddle in the 2nd round. Look, to me, he's a top 10 wide receiver, right? And that's saying that he's in an offense with Tyreek Hill, right? But, I mean, let's just say, in a perfect world, Tyreek Hill has some type of suspension, right? Maybe he's suspended for a game or 2. To start the year, Jalen Waddle is going to be a locked and loaded top 5, top 6 receiver for your fantasy teams. This guy is that talented of a wide receiver. He just gets overshadowed because a Tyreek Hill is in town there in Miami. This is a guy that has touchdown potential on each and every play, and I've been super high on him all off season. And then Najee Harris, I mean, a guy that is in a Pittsburgh offense that is going to use him as a workhorse back. And they improved their O-line this offseason, right? So the running game should be better. He should get a lot more passing work, right? Because Kenny Pickett is still his quarterback. He doesn't have the biggest arm. And this team doesn't have the most talented wide receiver group, right? So Najee Harris, I think his volume is there as far as passing work and rushing work. And do we have to worry about Jaylen Warren, the backup there? Sure, a little bit, right? As far as maybe he could take some catches away from Najee Harris. But I think Najee Harris is still the back in this offense, to no one's surprise, and he should still have a very good season. At the number 8th pick, we're going to start with Stephon Diggs, right? A guy who has fallen a little bit down the boards, and then you compare him with a Jonathan Taylor and a Calvin Ridley, right? For me, Jonathan Taylor falls to the second round strictly because, to me, he's falling down my draft boards a little bit. And again, don't forget this, I'm the one who put all these drafts together. He's falling down my boards a little bit just because I'm worried about this offense being so bad to the point where they don't have a lot of opportunity to score the ball, don't have a lot of opportunity to move the sticks, right? So just a little bit of worry to me about Jonathan Taylor and his rushing work. I believe Jonathan Taylor's floor is incredibly low this year, but I do believe if this offense can figure something out, his ceiling can be super high, and I think that's a fair price for him in the middle of the second. But you have Stephon Diggs. You know what he's going to give you, right? As he only has a couple elite years left, as he is 30 years old, but you know what you're going to get from Stephon Diggs. And then you can get Calvin Ridley, right? My favorite my favorite receiver in this draft, really, to be completely honest, as I've been high on him all off season. If you missed yesterday's podcast, go check it out. You'll see me rave about him even more. Calvin Ridley, to me, I think he's primed to have a very good season, an all-pro level type of season. And I think if you could get an all-pro level wide receiver in the late third, your team's in a really good spot, right? And I believe you can also, use this to grab an Anthony Richardson later on to pair with Jonathan Taylor. You can get a Trevor Lawrence in the 6th, 7th round to pair with Calvin Ridley if you really believe in the Jacksonville offense like I do, right? So with this build, you get potentially the running back 1, if not a top 5 back, you 2 wide receiver 1s. It's a very high-risk, high-reward type of build, but when you're in the 8th pick, you kind of need to go for high-risk, high-reward because you're kind of in the middle of no man's land, right? In the middle of the drafts. At the 9th pick, I'm going to go Saquon Barkley, and I think I follow that up with the Sun God, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and then you close the 3rd round off with Travis Etienne. You get potentially the running back 1 in Saquon Barkley, my 3rd ranked running back in my rankings. So I believe in Saquon, and the only question there is, can he get a deal done before the season, right? But for Amon-Ra, he's a safe wide receiver 10. You know what you're going to get for him, stability and upside, right? I'm going to continue to preach that this offseason with our draft builds. But Travis Etienne, he's a guy that, he when he played last year, you've seen the flashes, right? He has the potential to be a week in and week out a running back 1 for your teams. But sometimes he just gets overshadowed and kind of forgotten, right? He can disappear at times. And that was the frustrating thing with Travis Etienne. But I think if you have Saquon Barkley, Etienne, which there's no competition for Etienne this year yet again, so he should take a step up in that Doug Peterson offense. If you can have two top 10 running backs with a safe top 10 wide receiver, and then you have the potential for stacks later on in your draft with a Jared Goff, with a Trevor Lawrence, right? I think this puts your team in a very good position as, again, stability and upside. The 10th pick, we're going to grab A.J. Brown, a potentially top 5 receiver. He's only 26. He's entering his prime with Jalen Hurts on one of the best offenses in the league. To me, he's my wide receiver 6, and I think it's a fair spot for him to go at the end of the 1st round. You follow him up with a Bijan Robinson, and then Jahmyr Gibbs. This is a go big or go home type of build, and it's a build that I wanted to just throw out there to get your guys' thoughts, as this is kind of probably the craziest build here out of the 12 picks. But you have A.J. Brown, a guy who's stable, but he's still entering his prime. He can explode this year to be a top 5 wide receiver. You have 2 potentially big RB1s, 2 guys that were drafted in this past draft with 1st-round picks, which you never see from running backs anymore. The draft capital is there. The team wants to use them and use them at a high level, right? Bijan, we might have to wait a couple weeks for him to really solidify himself as the number 1. But if he doesn't, let's say he gets the workload from day 1, this is a steal of a pick at the early of the 2nd, right? This is a guy that could potentially be a top 5 talent this year if he has the workload guaranteed from day 1. But, we might have to wait with Cordero Patterson, with Tyler Algier there still in Atlanta. These are guys that are going to take some work away from Bijan, but whenever Bijan takes over and solidifies himself, this would be a steal of a pick in the early 2nd. Jahmyr Gibbs, PPR monster, at least we're projecting it that way. He's a guy that they might use at receiver. He's a guy that they might use as a utility back, right? or he could be a 3-down back from day one, right? But we expect the only downside with Jahmyr Gibbs is that David Montgomery will get a lot of the touchdown work, just like Jamal Williams did last year in the red zone with the Detroit offense. But Jahmyr Gibbs is going to have the other early down work, right? He's going to be the PPR monster out of the backfield, get you a lot of points, a lot of catches, and potentially a lot of long touchdowns right off the catch. Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan, and A.J. Brown, right? So a lot of go big or go home type of build. But I think if it hits, your team is going to be close to unstoppable. The 11th pick is going to be CeeDee Lamb. We're going to follow that up with my running back 4 and Josh Jacobs. And then Joe Burrow, my quarterback 4, right? So you could potentially have top 5 players at the quarterback, running back, and wide receiver positions. Stability and upside. Tons of flexibility with this build also, right? So with this build, you can get a Dak Prescott later on, right? Let's say you don't want to go Joe Burrow. You can pair Joe Burrow. You can go Lamar Jackson here at the 311. Or if you don't want to go quarterback, go somewhere else and come back, right, with a Dak Prescott later on, right? Or grab a Jimmy G as a backup later on in your drafts to pair with a Josh Jacobs. You have a lot of stack possibilities, and I love stacks, right, as far as my fantasy teams early on. So you have a lot of flexibility here with this lineup, and I think whenever you can have a top 5 player at the quarterback, running back, and receiver position, your team's going to be in a pretty good spot to win at a high level. And I think with CeeDee Lamb, Josh Jacobs, and Joe Burrow, you can't really go wrong at the 11th pick. And to close off our drafts at the 12th pick, I have Davante Adams, and you're going to follow up with Tony Pollard. And then at the 312, I'm going to say this instead, you could go Lamar Jackson at the 312, right? But for the sake of this video and for sake of a couple different builds here you can look at, I'm going to go Keenan Allen, right? So you could potentially have a top 5 running back in Tony Pollard with the PPR upside and workload that he's going to have this season. And then you can have 2 potentially top 10 wide receivers, right? Keenan is more of a stretch because of that offense. But the Los Angeles offense, I mean, they brought in Kellen Moore. It's going to be more pass-focused than ever this year. And Keenan Allen, if he could stay healthy, we know the potential that he can be a consistent wide receiver 10, right? But you can have Davante Adams, Keenan Allen, 2 top 10 possibly wide receivers, a guaranteed one in Davante Adams. And then I went with Keenan Allen because you're on the turn, right? So if you wanted to go Davante Adams, Tony Pollard, come back around with Keenan Allen, and then you can go and reach on a Justin Herbert a little bit, right? So you can start with a Justin Herbert, Keenan Allen, Davante Adams, and Tony Pollard. So you can have a stack there in Los Angeles and one of the projected most high-powered passing offenses in the league with some stability in Davante Adams and upside in Tony Pollard. This is a build that's very interesting, right? But I think it's going to produce a lot of PPR points, to be completely honest. But let me know what you guys think down below. What is your favorite build out of those 12 picks? I understand this is not probably the way you would draft, right? Maybe you would go a player here or there, and if you switch just 2 players, that kind of changes the entire draft, the butterfly effect, right? But let me know your favorite build of these teams down below. And without further ado, that's going to do it for today's show. We're on the road to 500 subs on the channel. We'll be back tomorrow with a NBA free agency prediction video, right? So if you're interested in that, subscribe to the channel, like the videos, and we're going to be back tomorrow with another great podcast. But until then, we'll see you guys then. Stay happy, stay healthy. We're out.